Welcome to my Beginning Watercolor Tip 13, All About Edges Part 2. Beginning Watercolor Tip 11, All About Edges Part 1, was loaded with information, and I talked about hard edges, soft edges, positive edges, negative edges, and lost and found edges. So it was loaded with information. In Part 1, I was using organic leafy shapes. And for this video, part 2, I'm going to use more of a industrial scene with this cityscape from a recent painting I've done called Metropolis. This painting's all about edges. There's a lot of hard edges, some soft edges, there's a lot of lost and found edges, and there's a lot of positive and negative shapes. The main focus is going to be lost and found edges, however, the other edges will come into play also in some of the discussion. In order to demonstrate how I achieved some of these edges in this painting, I'm going to take a section of the painting, I'm just going to recreate it on another sheet of paper and discuss how I achieved some of the effects and some of the edges I got. So on the right is my painting Metropolis, and on the left is the section that I'm going to recreate. The main focus of this video is about edges, and primarily lost and found edges in particular, so I won't be talking a lot about color or any of the other things in this painting, so I can stay on the topic. This is my sketch. It's a line drawing that I've done to recreate a smaller section of my larger painting Metropolis. And how I'm going to approach this exercise is I'm going to use a frisket made of packing tape to mask off some large white areas, and then I'm going to put a very fluid wash over top of my painting, and then I'm going to remove the frisket and begin starting to develop this small painting. Because these are larger areas that I'm going to mask off, I'm going to use an adhesive frisket approach as opposed to a liquid mask. So I cover my paper with this packing tape, and then I come in and I'll cut out the shapes that I want to preserve the whites on, and then I'll remove the rest of the tape. One of the things I want to point out is I've drawn this from my painting where I already established lost and found edges and shapes that merged, and when I drew this, I drew these outlines of the shapes I'm going to cut as larger shapes. They're not just one element such as a building or a water tower. They're assemblages of these individual elements that make up a larger white shape. And what I'll do is I'll mask it, I'll put my wash on, I'll remove the tape, and then I'll start to develop those areas with my brush. Here I'm showing you where I'm cutting out one of these shapes, and then I'm going to remove the masking. So this piece that I'm removing is an area that would have the wash on it, and the area to the right would be protected in a white shape that I'm going to protect. And this is what it looks like when I'm done. So these kind of shiny areas will be protected. Those are my large white shapes. And then the other areas are all exposed to the very fluid wash that I'm going to begin to apply. So here I have a 1-inch wash brush, and I'm going to put down a mixture of colors here. And just as these white shapes have smaller elements that link together to create a larger white shape, the same thing is going on in this exposed area where I'm applying the wash, where this wash is being applied over top of buildings and in the background and water towers. And so some of these edges are just going to merge together on these shapes. As I start to work on this painting, I'll develop those and give more definition to that. But you can see to the right there where I'm putting that wash, there's a building, and I've just painted right over the edge of the building and right into the background and right into the next building with the same tone. And that's the approach I'm taking here, so that we get these lost edges. I'm not painting each building one at a time. I've just taken a tone, a middle value tone, and laid it across the whole composition, with the exception of the areas that are exposed. And the result of this is, right now there's a lot of lost edges because I have applied this wash without any regard to the drawing other than the area which I've protected with the mask. It will pretty much become a task of finding some of these edges, although not completely, so I can bring some more definition to the various elements. One note I'll make is I've seen some paintings where people are trying to focus on negative space, and they'll cover a whole page with a wash like this. Then they'll go in and paint around objects. The only problem I have with that is if you don't save some of the whites, then you don't have a full range of values. You pretty much, in some of those paintings that I've seen, you go from middle value to dark value, and you don't have much in the way of light or white. And I think that becomes very limiting. That's why if I'm going to take this approach where I'm going to put this very uncontrolled, unlimited wash down, I normally do some planning in advance and do some masking so that I can save some of my whites. So here I'm starting to carefully go around my work surface and remove the tape from the areas that I've masked. And here you can see with the tape removed the white shapes that I've saved. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start taking some middle to dark value tones, and I'm going to start finding some of my edges now. And as I do this, and as I move around the composition, there's areas where I'm going to give a complete edge, and there's other areas where it's going to be broken up and the two shapes are going to merge into one another. So here I'm doing some painting in a negative space. I'm on the shadow side of a building here, and that starts to help move this water tower forward, and it also starts to give definition to a building that's right there in front of that shape I just painted. You can start to see the roof line on it. As I work my way around here and I look at the shapes that I'm painting right now, and there's a little water tower there, and I'm putting that dark value in between what would be the legs or in the pipe coming down. And so that those dark shapes in negative space bring the legs and the pipe of that water tower forward, but I'm letting those legs and pipes merge right into the building, into the white shape below. So there's no edge there. So I kind of have that broken up, and I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to let those edges just become lost, and you'll be able to follow the white from the water tower straight into the white of the building and keep moving along that white shape through various elements. There's an artist teacher that I've learned much of what I know about watercolors from, and one time he spoke of an exercise where you would put your finger on a white shape on one side of the paper, and you would try to make it such that you could follow that white of the paper all the way across to the other side without lifting your finger. So the goal there was to make all the white shapes connected across your whole composition. I always thought that was an interesting concept. So far, I've been working around my composition, working in negative space, using middle to middle dark valued tones, and I've started to define some of these building shapes. And now what I'm going to do is start to work in some of the areas where I protected the paper, because I preserve those not only to be white areas, but to be some of my lights. So some of that, through the completion of this exercise, will remain totally white, and other areas are going to have some light washes on them. But if I didn't preserve them to begin with as a unit, I wouldn't be able to go back and have some of these light areas. So I'm beginning to paint a warm tone around the negative edge of this little water tower shape. So by working in negative space, I'm starting to describe that water tower. And I'm not going to completely go around it with this tone. I'm going to put just a little mark there on that side, but that's all I'm going to do on that side. I'm bringing a wash on the left side of this shape. I'm going to put a couple marks underneath to indicate that there's a bottom edge there. But I'm going to let the rest of that right side just disappear into the building, creating a lost edge. That little mark I put on the top right of that right side is just enough to describe that there's an edge there and two shapes coming together, but then it quickly gets lost and leave it to the eye to complete. So I'm going to move over here on this other building shape and water tower, and I'm doing a similar thing. So I'm painting on the negative edge of that water tower in the negative space, and I'm describing again the left hand side there by putting that wash in negative space, but I'm not going to do too much on the right side except for a few marks. So there you can look at that and see just that mark lets the eye know that there's an edge and two shapes coming together. I don't need to paint around the whole shape. So I'm going to go back to this water tower, and I want to give the indication that there's an edge going around the radius of the top of that water tower. So to show that and suggest that, I'm just going to put a few marks going around there. I'm not going to put a complete line. I don't need that. So a few marks just gives the indication that there's an edge there, and the eye can complete that. It's just a lost and it gets found again, and you can kind of follow that radius around just by putting some marks. So I don't need a big heavy undersided line that follows the whole contour of that. And I'm going to come over to this other tower. I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to make a few brush marks underneath the radius there to indicate that there's an edge. And you can see that this is a broken up value that I'm placing here. I didn't just take that value and draw it all the way underneath the radius of what would be the top. You can see that the edge starts, it gets lost, and then it gets found again going around the radius of that. It makes for a much more interesting composition than just painting a solid line underneath everything. Here where you can see I'm repeating this shape throughout this composition, this kind of water tower shape that I have. And I'm doing a similar thing back there. I've got it represented by the wash that's behind it, and I'm indicating that there's an edge there, and I'm using a tone to kind of contour part of that shape with this warm kind of sienna type tone. But you can see where the roof, the top of that tower, just kind of disappears right into the base of it in some areas. It just gets lost. Now I'm taking some of that very warm tone to move it through my composition, and I'm giving the indication that there's some window shapes here on this building on the back side of this other building, and that helps reinforce that edge. But I'm not just painting squares. I'm making brush marks that give the indication that there's a rectangle, but I don't paint the complete rectangle. Those edges get broken up and lost in spots, and I leave it for the eye to complete. So you can see I'm not painting little squares everywhere. I'm making little brush marks that start to come together to suggest that there's a rectangle or a square, but I'm not painting the whole shape. I'm repeating these window shapes in this other area. And ask yourself, if you were painting similar windows in a composition that you were working on, Would you look at these as interesting shapes that you could break up and create an area of interest? Or would you think of them as windows and paint them as squares and rectangles? Here I'm going to put a few areas of value and colors that give the impression that you're looking through underneath this silo. So I have more of a maroon tone on the left and leaning towards a green tone here on this right side, but just trying to give the suggestion that you're seeing underneath this through to the building behind. The focus of this video wasn't to create a painting as much as just to do an exercise to take a piece out of my larger painting, recreate it, demonstrating how I've created some of the lost and found edges. And I'm going to speak to a few of those right now. You can see where the roof of this water tower is this white, and it comes down to the side and it comes over into the building behind it and gets lost into the leg and comes all the way down into this other building, and the same going the other way. It all kind of comes into that one large white shape and just gets lost. And there's elements of lost and found edges all along the way by some of the brush marks. You can go here to this corner of this building and follow back, in perspective. There's a line there, and it's reinforced by the fact that there's that white shape which stops right along where there'd be an edge. So just that one mark gives the suggestion that there's an edge there that's blocking the rest of that pole. You can see here this white vertical shape leads right into this horizontal shape and follows all the way down up into that pole with wires and to the building behind it. It's not just the light and white areas either. There's plenty of dark areas where a tone goes from one shape into the next shape and just continues to carry on through the composition. Here's a good example where you can take that white tone down the building. It leads right into the wires and the pole and straight across to that building in the background. As I said earlier, the focus here wasn't to create a painting, and one of the things that I'll point out is because I took a segment out of my larger piece and my larger composition, this isn't necessarily set up to be a successful painting. It's interesting, but it really didn't develop with a center of interest. It's kind of the same everywhere. So keep that in mind. This is a component of a larger painting that I just recreated. And if I was going to paint this in its entirety as a painting, there'd be some areas that the contrast wouldn't be as strong. Some of the edges might be softer in different areas. But because I kind of took this out of one area of a painting, which was set up to be a lot of hard edge, some soft edge, but a lot of lost and found, it doesn't have necessarily the feel of what a finished painting would feel. I hope after watching this you have a better idea of the concept of lost and found edges and get a better understanding that you can sometimes just let shapes disappear into one another. You don't always have to tell the whole story with everything. You can create resting places and places of curiosity and let the person try and figure it out. Sometimes just a brush mark is enough to indicate an edge and let the viewer know that there's two shapes coming together. And I thought this cityscape was a good subject matter to do that with. So next time you go to paint a window or a door or something on a building, think about that more as an interesting shape rather than just painting a square or a rectangle. So here I'm back to my original painting, the full sheet, and I painted just a segment of that top right quadrant there where there's an area of high contrast, and you can see that area has the most contrast in this painting. The other areas don't have quite as contrast or may have some softer edges, but the approach throughout this whole painting is the same as what I did in that little segment. So sometimes these larger pieces get intimidating, but it's just more of the same, just on a larger scale. I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching. That was part 2 of All About Edges. If you do have any more questions regarding that subject, you can contact me at contactoursurowiczart@gmail.com. And you can check out all my work on Facebook. And don't forget to like it, share it, and comment. Thank you.